Hello, everyone, and welcome to VikingFans.com. I'm Tom Moore, and after getting a few in-depth reviews about the team from our friends at VikingsTerritory.com, we have the pleasure to welcome one of their founders, Adam Warwas. Adam, welcome to the VikingFans.com Longship.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me, and I just want to say that it's an honor. I know your resume in terms of who you interview and having Pete Bursich on a regular basis, and also the quality of fans that you have at your site, and it's really a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because now all of a sudden everybody's sitting a little bit closer to their speaker, so that's always a good way to start. and for you, Adam, I mean, most good ideas start with a passion, and I understand you've been a lifelong Vikings fan, so I want to know, how does a guy now living in Ohio become a Vikings fan?
Well, it was a long journey to Ohio. We moved here about 2 years to the date, actually, my wife and kids and I. Previous to that, I spent 10 years in Valdez, Alaska, which was really conducive, living in Alaska, to being a football fan, not just a Vikings fan, but a football fan in general, because the football season tends to be in the fall and winter months, which is when it's really cold and dark, and you have to find things to keep yourself entertained. And football was natural for me because growing up in Minnesota, it was a natural fit, obviously, to pursue a passion like Vikings football in greater detail through writing, which is also something I've been interested in for as long as I can remember.
Well, I'll tell you what, the good news for us is we got somebody in Ohio, and that means that when Mick Tinglecoff gets in, you know, our site is actually working to get Chuck Foreman and Ed White in. When they all get in, we got a place to stay, don't we?
Yes, absolutely.
That sounds good. Well, as you look back at your time following the Viking team, what's your most treasured moment in the team's history from being a fan?
Well, as Vikings fans, we sure love to hate those heartbreaking moments. They definitely stick out as our most memorable moments. As far as our most treasured moment, I guess I would have to go with the 2009 season. I happened to be at the Baltimore Ravens game. I don't know if you recall it in detail or not, but Brett Favre and the Vikings were up by a good amount, and then in Vikings fashion, it looked like they were going to blow their lead at the last minute and blow their undefeated streak. And Stephen Hoshka, I think, for the Ravens, missed the kick as the clock expired, and the Vikings won. And I'm pretty sure I was the only person standing in the Metrodome. Everyone else had pretty much given up. It was kind of a gimme kick.
Yeah.
And I looked around me, and everybody had their hands over their faces. No one was looking. People were leaving. And he ended up missing that kick, and the whole place just erupted. So for me personally, I think anytime you experience something in person, it makes it that much more memorable, and that was about as exciting as it's ever gotten for me in terms of attending a Vikings team.
Well, it's funny you talk about Hauschka. I mean, he was a kicker who hit almost anything. Not only was it a gimme shot, but for him to miss was really unusual. And I remember that season. It was really 2 points in the season that kind of helped us take off. One was the 49er comeback, and then it was that Baltimore comeback as well that kind of set our pace towards the NFC Championship.
Yeah, the 49ers, the Brett Favre throw to the back of the end zone. I was in the living room on that one, but that's equally as memorable. That was a heck of a play, and it's interesting that those are some of my favorite memories because I'm really not a Brett Favre fan. Never was, not even in 2009, but that season sure was exciting.
It shows that winning soothes all wounds, doesn't it?
Close.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, so how do you take that from being a fan to making a decision to take it to the next level and create Vikings territory?
Really, it was an interest. I've always been a writer. I've pursued other avenues of writing, and I think if you want to be a successful writer, you have to write about things that you like. And the Vikings, like I said, were a natural fit for me. I loved football. When I started writing, it was kind of the onset of the blogosphere, if you will. In terms of pro football talk was not your everyday place to go to. The mainstream media still had a stronghold, and I think we've seen a lot of transition in the last decade for certain as far as where fans go to get their information on a particular football team. You have a better ability of getting more specific information on what you're looking for with the innovations and the creativity that can be found on the internet, as your site also shows in these interviews like these ones.
I'm always curious because you guys got a really top-notch level of reporters that are available and engaged at all times. How'd you go about recruiting them?
I tricked them.
What'd you do?
No, really we do. We're very lucky to have who we have. and each one has their own unique story as to how they came about. Brett Anderson, he's the brains behind our operation in terms of being a webmaster. He's currently working on a complete redesign of our site that is going to be opening some eyes. It's really going to be top-notch stuff once we get around to unleashing that. But he's also, he underestimates himself as a writer. When you talk to him later, you're going to find out he's really in tune, and he knows a lot about Vikings football, fantasy football, football in general, and he's a much stronger writer than he ever gives himself credit for. Him and I kind of started because I needed help on the technical end, and he's been a heck of a partner to have.
And by the way, you mentioned Brett, and I'm going to be talking to him about, the fantasy football season this year. What people probably don't know is I may not actually post that. I may just use that for myself so I can be more effective.
That's right. You can start a couple leagues, use that information.
That's right.
Yeah, and Carl Knowles, Lindsey Young, they came along after Brett, and really it starts out with some guest posts with those two. They were invited to contribute on a guest basis, and I liked what they had, and I said, hey, if you're willing to keep writing, we're willing to keep posting it. Carl has some experience at another website involving the Indianapolis Colts. He's from Indiana. And Lindsey Young, I took notice of her work back when there was a website called TC Huddle, and she specializes in player interviews, and she just does a phenomenal job, so I was familiar with her work and was more than happy to bring her on. Reef Hussein, obviously, is a pretty big name in Vikings circles. He's very analytical, in-depth. For my money, he's the best writer out there if you want all the information. Sometimes it's a lot to take in. He'll hit you with every aspect of every angle in one article, and you're in it for the long haul. You might have to make a sandwich and take a break and go get some coffee. But if you want every last detail, Arif is the guy that can deliver those goods, and we were thrilled to bring him on. I think he writes for about 87 websites right now.
Right.
We're lucky to have him on a full-time basis, and we're very grateful for that.
By the way, we learned with Arif when we were at training camp is no matter when we went to the media room, he was always there. We're not sure he ever left.
Yeah, I've heard the stories that he can be a little crazy at like training camp and draft day, and everywhere I turn around, I feel like I'm hearing a story about him these days.
Well, when you look at your site, VikingsTerritory.com, what is your vision? What's your team's goal? What do you want to do with it?
Vikings Territory, basically, the goal started out as we had a following of people. I used to write for Vikings Gab. I wrote for over 2,000 articles for the Sports Gab Network before deciding to branch off on my own. And that was during the Favre years, 2009, 2010, 2011. And I started to feel a lot of pressure. And I got married, and I had kids. And as you know, this type of thing can be time-consuming. Mm-hmm. And my priorities started to change, and I felt a lot of pressure there. So I wanted to branch off on my own and feel less pressure. And still give a home to all the friends that I'd made on the Internet, and faithful readers that I really appreciate. If I had just left them, it was going to leave a big hole in my life. So I didn't want that to happen. I wanted a place. So it started out real small when I decided to branch off on my own. And once again, just kind of like it did at Vikings Gab, it's evolved into so much more. But luckily I have a great team that I'm able to have a high-quality product while still not feeling that pressure to kick out 14 articles a day.
Absolutely. Well, as you look at it, you're one of the reporters, obviously, and you've got a group as well, and you have to keep that unbiased and non-fan approach. But I got to ask you to, honestly, Adam, has there ever been a current or ex-Viking player that you ran into during your reporting time where you just got overly excited to meet him?
Probably the most excited I've ever got to meet a player was Chris Carter. That was last year prior to his Hall of Fame induction. He went to his hometown of Middleton, Ohio, and obviously me being in Ohio now, I figured there better be a perk to living here. So I drove down there. He was receiving some hometown honors for his Hall of Fame ceremonies, and getting to meet Chris Carter was just a highlight for me. The guy, I grew up watching him when I was a little kid. When I was a teenager, he was still playing. You hear some stories about his personality, and I'm sure there's truth behind him, but he was a class act to me, and he's one of the all-time greats, probably, for my money, the second best wide receiver of all time. The guy was a magician with the football.
Well, we've got good news for you. As we had Chris Carter a couple of months ago on, and he was everything you'd want him to be as a fan. He was nice, he was gracious, and he actually was limited on his schedule to about 15 minutes. He was actually going off on his book tour, and he gave us a little bit of extra time. He called early and said, hey, if you guys can go early, I can spend another 10 minutes with you. So we learned a lot about, not only his career, but he actually kind of took us through a guide of how he went being a receiver, how he understood the field better, and how he knew, exactly the number of steps between the line of scrimmage and the sidelines. So you felt really educated as a fan, and we had a great time with Chris.
That's excellent. Yeah, he's obviously one of the greatest of all time that the Vikings have had and probably will ever have.
Absolutely. Well, when you look at this team, we're about to move outdoors to TCF Bank Stadium. Obviously, you've been there for a couple of preseason games so far. But how do you expect that to affect this team, moving from a dome team to an outdoor team? Clearly, we're going to get some type of weather elements, whether it's rain or snow.
I've been real curious about this, and I've been wanting to pen an article about it, but I can't figure out how to say what I want to say. And basically, what I want to say is I don't know, and that's a good thing. I feel like I would have known exactly how this would have gone under the Childress or Frazier regimes, in that they would have let it affect them. I'm not sure that Mike Zimmer is going to let this affect his Vikings football team, and I think he's a wise choice. He's a no-nonsense, nose to the grindstone type of football coach, and he surrounded himself with similar personalities. And I really think that these guys are going to be all about the football game that's in front of them, and all this extra stuff that seems like it crops up year after year after year. I think it died with the Chris Cluey drama, and I think we're going to be a football team that focuses on football. And I hope that's the case. I'm sure there'll be things that come up. There always are, suspensions or Adrian Peterson going to the Cowboys talk or whatever it might be. There's always going to be that noise. But I feel like Mike Zimmer is the coach that's finally going to turn that bus around in terms of letting it affect the Vikings football games.
Well, I hope so, and I'll tell you what, we were excited because when I talked to Carl a little bit earlier and asked him, give us an idea, can we expect some improvement in this defense? The best thing he said was, we're not going to be 31st. I'm not going to share what it was. I'll let the fans hear what it was, but his answer made me feel a lot better about this team.
Good. Yeah, you can always rely on Carl for some optimism.
As we close out our conversation, I wanted to ask you, when you look at this team coming off a 5-9-1 season last year, expectations from fans aren't really for a championship season. But Adam, how do you predict this Viking team will do in 2014? And maybe more importantly, at what point of the season, if at all, would you expect Teddy Bridgewater to secure the starting position at quarterback?
Well, let me start with the second question first. I think Teddy Bridgewater will start this season, and I think that's going to be unfortunate. But I think it's just a matter of when, not if, Matt Castle starts to lull in the middle of the season. If you look at Matt Castle's career, it just seems inevitable that he's gonna lose whatever hot streak he's got at the moment, and that's the moment Vikings fans are going to be clamoring for Teddy Bridgewater. And I'm not saying that Vikings fans will get what they want with Mike Zimmer, but if Mike Zimmer truly means what he says, that he's going to play the best roster that he can to produce wins, then I think eventually this season that's going to mean starting Teddy Bridgewater. That's not to take anything away from Castle. I think he's a fine quarterback, but he's more of a you-know-what-you-get type of quarterback. And I think eventually this season, in year one of Teddy Bridgewater's career, there's going to be a point where that potential becomes too tempting and too real to just let sit on the bench, especially if Matt Castle is struggling at any point. As far as my expectations for the season, I've described it as I just think it's going to be a fun and exciting season for a change. It's been a while since we've had one of those where it hasn't been a total letdown or just kind of boring or just kind of the same old week in, week out misery, if you will. And that's overstating. We had some good stuff with Adrian Peterson's, 2,000 yards and chasing the record and some individual stuff. But as a team, I think this is going to be a really, really fun roster and regime to watch grow. Like he said, I'm not expecting a Super Bowl ring this year, but I think it's going to be a lot more fun and give us a lot of optimism for the future as we move towards getting that new stadium.
I'll tell you what, the one thing I'm looking forward to when we talked to Pete Burchage the other day, he said if we'd had a playoff game last year, a wild card playoff game, and we'd played outside at TCF Bank Stadium, it would have been 20 below zero, which would have been the coldest playoff game ever. I just want a shot at that. Just one time, get those fans out there and see those guys with those that cold air coming out of their breath.
Wouldn't that be absolutely awesome?
It would be, absolutely. As long as you and I are sitting in front of our couch with a fire going on, I'll be in good shape.
I'm down with that. I'll bring the beer.
There you go. I like it. Well, Adam, again, we both appreciate you giving your thoughts on the Viking squad, but also helping to bring the voices of Vikings territory to our fans. And I want to remind our fans to check out Adam and his team's stories this season on VikingsTerritory.com. And you can also follow Adam on Twitter at Viking Territory. And Adam, again, thanks for joining us on VikeFans.com.
Thank you, Tom. Enjoy the season.
You bet.